gods of Olympus! Do you need more proof than this?
You're tuning in to the J-Blast Network. Oh yeah, welcome to the next level. Yo, welcome back everybody to another retro discussion. Today we're going to be talking about the length of games. How long should a game be, and are short games still good? It's a pretty complicated answer, so tune in or tune out. So the other day I was playing God of War. I beat that game. It's a pretty good 6 to 8 hour game, and it got me thinking a little bit about the length of games. You know, it's a big topic of discussion nowadays because everybody wants their games to be long, especially since games now are going at the price of $70, maybe even $100 if you get a special edition. And I think there should be a balance between that. You know, I don't think every game needs to be like 90 or 100 hours long, because some people just aren't even going to beat the game if it's that long, as much as they say they want it that long. But I do think there should be a decent length for a game depending on the price and depending on what's in the game. And length isn't always just described as how long it takes to beat the campaign. You know, sometimes there are multiplayer games that offer a lot of different characters and a lot of different modes, and that's how you get your length out of that game. But for these single player games, or for different genres of games with single player games, like puzzle games, action adventure games, platformers, yada yada yada, I think the time varies between that. And so I want to discuss some of those games. For instance, a puzzle game, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 is a pretty great puzzle game, and I think its campaign, I haven't really fully beat it yet, but I think it's a pretty decently length campaign. I think it took about like 4 to 6 hours to beat. I don't even know. I haven't even beaten it, but it is pretty hard. Or I just made stuck at puzzle games. But the point I'm trying to make here is that that game, despite its campaign being like that, it still has a bunch of other modes to play, and then it has multiplayer. And that game is like, well, it was like $40 or $30, something like that. It was around that price range, but that was a very good price for what the game was offering. And I do go back to that game from time to time, play with friends and play the different modes and things like that, because it's a pretty fun game to play, and I would say that that game has a good length. Same with God of War. God of War 1, you know, it's a pretty good length game. It's an action adventure beat 'em up game, and for the length of that game, there's not much being offered after the main campaign besides playing on a hard difficulty. It was a good length for that. I felt satisfied after playing that game. And an important topic to discuss when discussing games like that is the pacing. Now, this goes for action games and RPGs, because a lot of the times, a lot of developers will pad out their games with different things, and it'll make the game worse for it. Like, sure, it'll be shorter if it's taken out, but at least I'd rather have a more solid experience with that stuff taken out than a worse experience with that stuff still in. For instance, Sonic Colors, I made a video about that. You can go check it out, shameless plug. That game, in each world, mostly has 3 levels that are actually levels, and the other 3 levels are these short, gimmicky, boring levels that are just drag to go through. And because of that experience, when I play the game and I replay the game, if I'm not replaying those specific levels and I just replay the game in its entirety, I kind of get a downer feeling about the game because I just have to experience that stuff again. And it would just be more solid, and honestly probably the same length if you just removed those levels and kept the three acts instead of making 3 more acts cut down and with a bunch of gimmicks that nobody asked for. And I think that's a big problem with games nowadays. There are certain sections that feel like it's just padding, and I feel like developers are so scared for people to call their games short that they reuse content because maybe they're out of the budget, maybe they don't have enough time to make a new level, maybe they don't have this or that resource, and they have to get the game out by a certain time, and they need to have something there so they can say their game is this long. You know, I was playing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Excellent game, great game. I love Ratchet and Clank, one of the best Ratchet and Clank games. But I will say a criticism is that the 3rd act in that game is kind of bad compared to the rest of the game, because you get 2 planets, really 2 new planets that you go to, and one planet I felt wasn't as good as it was before, and the other planet is very much scripted compared to the other 2 planets. Like they don't feel as huge as the other 2 planets. And then you go to 2 more planets, but they're planets you already revisited, just to go to one extra area or do one extra thing in it. And it's like, man, I really wish they would have just take that time out to expand on the other 2 planets. It was going to be like that, instead of, you know, I hate saying half-ass because game development is a hard word, but half-assing those 2 planets and then reusing content again from the same planets that we already went to and spent a lot of time in. It's just an annoyance, right? There is one game that can do that right, or that did that sort of right, and it was Kingdom Hearts 2, but I would even say I would want those levels to just be like the first time around instead of having to go back and do something small again for a couple of minutes or whatever, right? This even affects RPGs. You know, Dragon Quest XI is also one of my favorite games of all time. I love Dragon Quest, but I will say the third act of Dragon Quest XI to me is kind of pointless, and it could have been cut down, and they could have just reworked the story of Act 2 to put that as the post game. We didn't need an extra 30 hours if it was just going to be what it was. It starts out interesting, but then you just start redoing a bunch of content, and the story suffers because of something that happened. I'm not going to say what happened, but the story suffers a bit to me personally because of what happens to initiate Act 3. And I feel as though it could have been I would say even greater game. For 60 hours it would take to beat Act 1 and Act 2, and whatever how many hours it take you to beat the post game stuff. That's what I feel like should have been done for that game, but that's not what happened. And as you can see these examples, pacing is a very important thing, and that's really what's going to mess up your game, not really just the length of a game. Now don't get me wrong, I don't want a short game, right? I don't want to pay $70 or $60 for a game that I'm going to beat in like 2 hours. That doesn't make any sense. Now there are games that are like that, but they always have extra modes. You know, Mega Man, for instance, when Mega Man 9 and Mega Man 10 came out, Mega Man would give us extra characters like Proto Man, like Bass, and stuff like that to make us play the game again, but it feels like a different playthrough. And I like when games do that. I think that's a perfect way to extend playtime if you're going to make a shorter game. Blaster Master Zero does it with his DLC. So that's a pretty good thing too. And I think you can there are ways to make a short game, you know, have extended time while we're using content a lot, but also offering a new experience. And I think adding more playable characters is the best way to kind of do that, or adding, I don't know, new costumes is a good way to do that. You know, those are good ways to really do that, because, you know, Crash 4 is another game that adds a bunch of costumes. And I'm always going back to the game, switching out the costumes, replaying levels, even though the game is already long enough with its things, and that's a whole another topic. But point is, I'm replaying that game a lot because I'm switching out the costumes and getting a new experience, a slightly new experience from playing with that different costume. Again, these are ways to extend a shorter game out instead of just trying to pad out a game to make it long. Now, I don't think short games in general are a bad thing. However, I will say that people are very much not inclined to pay for a game that they can beat in an hour or 2 hours. Back in the day, a lot of games could be beaten in an hour. I'm talking about the days of the NES and the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. But because of stipulations like the life system, game overs, not having continues, and having to basically restart the whole game if you fail too much, it made the game seem longer to people because you were replaying the entirety of the game. You know, Sonic 2 comes to mind, for instance, or Punch Out, or some of these other games. You know, you failed, you have to restart it all. So you have to, you know, you pretty much mastered everything to be able to beat that game in under an hour, or in an hour, or in the time it would usually take. And developers knew this. That's why they put all that bullshit there in the first place. It was stupid. But like I said, I don't mind those games, but that archaic design of having a live system, having to restart all your progress for no good reason other than just to extend your playtime, that era has died out with games. And I think there are just better ways to extend playtime. My consensus in the game, if the game's not an RPG, I think, and it's just an action game, platformer, shooter, or whatever, I do think that a good minimum length is about 6 hours. I think 6 hours is a good minimum length for that stuff. And as long as it feels like we have had an experience, a great experience in those 6 hours, like it feels like a full game. It's like you're eating a meal, right? You're eating a meal. You don't want a meal that's just there, right? And you don't have to have a meal that's always this gigantic big breakfast or something. You can just eat a meal that is small portions, but it's filling. You want the game to be filling. As long as it's filling, there's no bad food on the plate to mess up the experience or something like that. And in this case, there's no bad padding in the game to make it mess up the experience. I think that makes a game more worthwhile. So to you guys in the comments, I would ask this question, you know, how long do you think a game should be? Depending on the genre, because genre does matter when it comes to these things. I'm mostly talking about the action adventure, platformers, shoot. I'm talking about the genres that have like the single player campaign. I'm not talking about things like puzzle games or fighting games and things like that, because those vary and those have their own stipulations too. We can't compare those games like that, because it just doesn't work. What you're doing with your time is different there from what you do with your time in these other games. And I would like to know, especially for RPGs, because there are a ton of RPGs out there, and some people are kind of scared to get into RPGs because their games are so long sometimes. Even though there was a set time back then of like 15 to 30 hours to beat them, but it's still a lot of time to invest in the game that you may not even like fully like in the end, you know? So I want to know what you guys think in the comments about this, and tell me, how would you make a game last long or have a lasting impression or feeling? And I'll leave it off on this note too when I'm talking about this, how I would personally make a game. If I were to make, let's say I had a limited resources and I made a shorter game, say about 2 hours, right? My thing is I would start trying to figure out ways to make people want to replay the game. And I would add, let's say I'm making a platform, right? The platform is only like about 2 hours long. Well, I would make the game have multiple playable characters. I would add costumes. I'd probably add a mode where you have to beat the game with only dying once. That'd be a mode, or a mode with no continues, mode like that. That's what things that I would do in my game, you know. And I'm constantly thinking about this stuff because, you know, I develop games myself, or I'm working to develop games. I had developed games in the past. So you have to think like that when developing a game, what you want to add and things like that. I think those are the perfect ways to extend playtime out in the game. But of course, depending on what the game is, you can't always add playable characters. You can't always add these things. So what do you guys think? I'm honestly curious about, what do you guys think games should do to extend their playtime? Do you think that some games don't need the padding? Do you think that the padding is worth it in some cases? What do you guys think? And I just want to ask from the perspective of buying a game at $60, buying a game at $30, buying a game at $70. What is your perspective on the length of games? I'd like to know in the comments below. With that being said, guys, I think this is a topic that can even branch out into other topics and more discussions on this, because this is a very broad topic because we're talking about games and multiple genres, and these links vary depending on the genre. So I definitely would like to cover those topics soon or later. I'll probably cover them in the future, most likely. With that being said, this is the J Blast Network signing out. And don't forget, you better believe, baby. Yeah.
Then what they say is true.
Theseus.
Of all the fools who try, you would be the last I would expect to seek an audience with the Sisters of Fate.
And you are the last one I would expect to become a servant of the Fates.
I serve and protect the Sisters of Fate for the glory of Zeus.
The time of Zeus is coming to an end.
You seek the